Hello, this is David and welcome to Breath of Fire 2, a review and retrospective history. After the moderate success of Breath of Fire, Capcom decided to do what it does best, create a sequel. Breath of Fire 2 was developed by many of the same employees who worked on the previous game, and although it was released in 1994 in Japan, it took well over a year for Capcom to finally release it in the West in December of 1995. While very popular in Japan, selling over 350,000 copies, it would not do so well in the States. So let's look and see what's going on in America in 1995. Chrono Trigger and Earthbound are released earlier in the year, and Phantasy Star 4 for the Genesis was released later on, so it had a good chance of doing well with the JRPG audience, but the problem was that there was a severe shortage of copies. Personally, I remember having a very difficult time finding a copy, and the game was actually on my radar. I had to call around to like 4 different game stores to find one that only had one copy, and then they would only reserve it for me for 1 hour while I drove up there to pick it up. To add fuel to the fire, the SNES was on its way out with the PlayStation picking up steam and the N64 on the horizon. Because of those issues, Breath of Fire 2 was pretty much dead in the water. The sequel completely triumphs over the original visually. While retaining the look and feel of the first game's world and diversity, Breath of Fire 2 has a much brighter anime look to it. The battle graphics are extremely well done and are some of the best to be seen on the SNES. Unfortunately, the music isn't as good or as varied as Breath of Fire's whimsical soundtrack. Quite a few of the tracks are very good, but most of them are played too often and the overall composition just isn't as good. A couple of the tracks from the first game do reappear, however, adding a bit more nostalgia to an already nostalgic game. Similarly to the first Breath of Fire, the laughably horrible translation is one of the worst criticisms of the game. Development began on Breath of Fire 2 during the localization process of the first game, which is why they pawned off the first one on Squaresoft. But things would be a little bit different now, with Capcom deciding to throw their own hat into the ring and localize their first RPG, and boy, does it show. The translation's pretty nonsensical. Some of the townsfolk speak gibberish, and there are a few times where yes and no are swapped. The plot of the game is supposed to be pretty interesting, and you can follow it at the beginning, but by the end, it gets so convoluted that even Einstein would have a hard time working out what's going on. Thankfully, a retranslation patch was released in 2009 that largely solves all these issues and comes highly recommended. One of the reasons that people were attracted to this game was its strange, echoing similarities to the first game. Though they took place centuries apart, Breath of Fire 2 has some of the same locations, races, and story elements that the first had, but this time, the world and races who inhabit it are much more developed. What you get is a much more epic game with a more interesting story and a great feeling of history and nostalgic familiarity. The menu thankfully has been completely redesigned to be more traditionally text-based than the icon-based menu of the original game. Also included is a monster meter which indicates the probability of random encounters in any given area. And, to flesh out the game, you have a town-building side quest, where you must recruit one of 3 carpenters to build 6 houses, and then find people from all over the world to move to your town and impart you with special abilities or items. There are 9 playable characters who join the player's party at set points throughout the story, and like the first game, each comes with a unique personal action which can be used outside of combat in order to access certain areas, destroy objects, avoid traps, or just move about the game more easily. For example, Cat and Bo can both hunt, Rand and Jean each move about the map differently to avoid random encounters, Nina can avoid pitfalls, Sten can cross gaps, and Spar can move throughout the forest freely to get to new areas. Also, for added customization, 6 shamans, each representing an element, can be fused with your other party members. While joined with a shaman, your characters will become stronger and may gain access to additional abilities while in battle. They may even change their entire appearance depending on the combinations that you choose. I guess that they realized that Karn's ability from the first game was far too overpowered and introduced the system as a way to balance it. Though, the PlayStation games ditched the fusion system wholesale. Unlike later installments in the series, Breath of Fire 2 is a direct sequel to the first Breath of Fire, taking place 500 years after the original game, and the story centers again on the boy of the brood, Ryu, who originally lives with his family, but after falling asleep under a mysterious dragon on the outskirts of town, Ryu returns to find his family missing and everyone in the village with a bad case of selective amnesia. Suddenly orphaned, he decides to run away to the big city with his friend Bo. Fast forward 10 years, and the two were taking odd jobs to make ends meet, but after a comedy of errors, Bo was falsely accused of theft, and to start our grand adventure, Ryu leaves town to find a way to clear his friend's good name. There's a lot more to it, and it touches on some deep themes such as sex, alcohol, child abandonment, and the evils of religion. While this has been done to death in this day and age, as a teenager in 1995, it was pretty revolutionary, and Breath of Fire 2 was the first game that I personally played that put a very Christian religion in bad light. This time around, Nina is a distant descendant from the original Nina of the first game. However, she's been ostracized from the castle because she was born with black wings and she wields extremely powerful black magic. Also, Dees or Blue makes a return in this game as well, and she's just as perverted as ever. However, rather than joining you during your journey like in the first game, here she's an optional character, and because of this she really has no backstory and just comes along for the ride. She has available to her every black magic spell in the game, as well as insane stats and the ability to completely restore her HP at will, which means that she lives up to her reputation as a goddess, but as previously stated, she gets little screen time and hardly any character development. Also, it's a shame that she's pretty much better than Nina in every way, except that she can't take advantage of shaman transformations. However, personally, I don't really use her all that much. 3 days prior to the release of the first game on the Game Boy Advance, Capcom announced that they would similarly port Breath of Fire 2 to the system with an initial release sometime in 2002. Like the re-release of its predecessor, the handheld version features redrawn character portraits in the menu screens, new still images used during cutscenes throughout the game, and a redesigned battle interface, similar to Breath of Fire 4. New features also include a dash button that allows you to run, as well as an item sharing system using the Game Boy Advance's link cables. However, the aforementioned problems with the music still exist. All in all, I have to say that I love Breath of Fire 2. It really is probably my favorite in the series, and it's a great game that stands the test of time. If you haven't played it, I do highly recommend it. Just please play it with the retranslation patch on the SNES. How do you feel about Breath of Fire 2 or the Breath of Fire series in general? Let me know, and if you like this, please like, comment, and subscribe, and have a good day.